So today I want to teach you how to make this synth patch, specifically because I got a lot of sounds out of it, because it does some fun, kind of cool modulation that made me think about things a little differently, and it's this patch here. Right, it sounds like I'm hitting a couple different notes, but I'm really just hitting one key at a time. If we were to play an chord, right? Sounds kind of trippy, right? And this patch does some cool modulation that I specifically learned on the OB-X8, which I just bought, just came in the mail. You do not need this expensive of a synthesizer. Don't buy this synth specifically to do this patch. I'm going to show you how to do it on Peak later because it's a bit easier to understand on there, but I came across this type of modulation specifically on this one at NAMM recently, and it kind of blew my mind. So let's kind of break it down a little bit, right? Oh, and by the way, today's video is sponsored by Squarespace, but more on them later. So looking here in our oscillator section, if we just listen to Oscillator 2, this is really doing all the heavy lifting. Right, what's happening? Well, there is a filter envelope modulation source that I can send to Oscillator 2's frequency. So if I turn up the filter frequency, like our attack, you hear that little whoop, right? And then we'll turn up our decay, maybe a little more. Wham, right? If we get rid of the attack, it kind of falls into place. But what's happening on the release? Our release is turned all the way down. If we turn our release up a little bit and turn our decay down, we get this type of sound. You hear that? It's almost like a tape stop, right? If we turn our decay all the way down, then you pair this with Oscillator 1, which doesn't have any modulation on it whatsoever. Right? Do you hear this? This is what I thought was really cool, because if you really wanted to fine tune this, we can go into page 2 and turn Oscillator 2's level down and have it be more of a subtle thing, just kind of chilling in the background. Right? Or if you wanted this to be really kind of punky and in your face, turn it all the way up, get a really short decay on here, and so cool. So what is happening? I had to make this patch like 5 times to really understand it, but I still couldn't really explain it, but I figured it out. So let's just make it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and exit this out. What we're doing is we're tuning Oscillator 2 to a 7 semitones up, which is a 5th in both the pretty much basic major and minor scale, right? So if we play this up, right, it's a 5th. But we want our filter envelope to modulate Oscillator 2. And our sustain here is going to act as where the final amount of modulation is going to push our Oscillator 2, and we want that to be 1 octave up. So this part's going to be really annoying. Forgive me ahead of time, but you're going to have to do this too. So I'm going to grab my sustain, and I'm going to turn my modulation up about halfway. There's a specific reason why I'm only doing about halfway. So let's see if we can get to an octave up. Nope. Right there. So what's happening right now? What we've just done is we've set our baseline where Oscillator 2 will forever land at, which is a 5th up, but kind of an octave lower than where it's going to be at when it's played. See what I'm trying to say? This is so confusing. When I press a key, Oscillator 2 goes up an octave. But when I let go of this key, it falls back down to this 7th. And the reason that's important is because if I turn our release up, you hear how it falls down to that 7th, or the 5th. But oscillator 1 is still staying steady. So in a weird way, it's playing a perfect note. And then when I let go, it's falling down to this fifth. I don't know. It's not a triad. And I don't think it's a double. I don't really know the proper terminology here. But I think it just sounds so cool. And the reason I found this interesting was because with our sustain being set exactly 1 octave up, we can then say how much this pitch falls into that perfect octave up, because the reason I only went halfway up on the modulation is so that we have room to move higher or lower. So I go halfway up on our modulation, and that way I don't go full on our sustain, because if I went full on our sustain, we couldn't go any higher than full. So this allows me to turn our decay up and have access to more value or more modulation or more voltage above where that octave is. So listen to this. Hear how it falls down? And this allows it to kind of fall into place. But what's cool here is if you turn your release up, you can then fall into that octave, and when you let go, the release is going to fall back down to our bass line, which is this fifth. Does that make sense? We'll turn our release up a little more, turn this one a little shorter. Hear that? Play a chord. Hear how this kind of works? You kind of get the idea, right? I thought that this type of modulation was really cool because I was a little confused by this mod source being the filter envelope. I didn't exactly understand what that meant. I thought it was meaning oscillator 2 being sent to the filter cutoff, but that's not the case. So in this setup, it's a little confusing to understand on this one because the screen doesn't really tell you much, and you kind of have to do a lot of it by ear. So I do want to kind of mess around with this a bit more, but on another synthesizer, which in this case is going to be Peak, because it's the synth I know the best at this point, and show you that you can do this in a multitude of different ways, especially if your synthesizer, and it doesn't have to be this one, and it doesn't have to be Peak, have a mod matrix or some basic modulation types of routing. So listen to how cool this thing is, right? I like no decay, maybe a little bit of attack. But if you turn your release all the way down, what about with an arpeggiator? Let's see what that'll sound like real quick. Oh. So cool. Let's turn our decay up. I can get lost on this all day. Yeah, so before I get too carried away, I'm going to switch the setup and show you how to do this on Peak. So so while I do that, I'm going to give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, Squarespace. In case you're not familiar with Squarespace, it's an incredibly easy to use all-in-one website, designer, hosting platform, and so much more. I've been using Squarespace for a while now, so when they reached out to sponsor a few videos, I said, of course, I'm already a fan. let's do it. So it's currently where I host all my merch like hats, shirts, sample packs, synth presets, and even the contact me page. It's never been easier to get a professional looking website within a few clicks at such an affordable price. Some of my favorite features on Squarespace are the customized email links that expire within 24 hours. So when you're selling digital goods like let's say music or videos or an ebook or something like that, you don't need to worry about changing or chasing down your links in case they get shared around online. The website builder is also awesome with gorgeous templates to start from that you can easily tweak to make them feel like your own. For example, on my site, I'm using the Event Horizon template, and I was easily able to add like a few extra pages and kind of change up some of the colors and stuff to really make it feel like mine. And trust me, I'd never be able to make a site like this good on my own. Long gone are the days of trying to code and do CSS or CCS, whatever it was called. And anyway, lastly, all the extensions with third-party companies that Squarespace has to offer to help run your business are incredible. These help you facilitate your shipping, product design, taxes, and so much more. It's crazy how simple Squarespace makes it. And like I mentioned earlier, if you're interested in starting a site or taking your music or your artistry to the next level, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/RickyTinez to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. All right, let's get back into it. All right, so let's do the same thing again, but on peak where we can see it a bit better. So initialize the patch. Let's take a listen. Cool, we need 2 oscillators. We already know that. I'm gonna go ahead and go into pulse width, one of my favorites. And let's tune oscillator 2 up 7 semitones or a fifth. Right, we're already more than halfway there. So now, this is where things get fun. We're gonna go into our mod matrix. We only wanna look at oscillator 2's pitch, right? Because that's what we were doing on the OB-X8. Again, this doesn't need to be just applied to the pitch. It could be applied to the filter and do some weird stuff, which we'll try after this. So now let's just give it some depth. I'm gonna just turn it up to 30. Wow, did I actually just nail that? I guess I kind of weirdly did. Now that we have our pitch set, let me go to mod envelope 1. So this is now going to be the source for this modulation. Now it should be off. Right, let's go ahead and zero out all this and get this going. And on different synths, you're gonna have to play around with how much modulation each one has. Like for example, let's say we're up here, it's kind of off, we can bring this down. Awesome, sounds like an octave to me, right? So now if we turn our amp envelope release up, it's the same effect that we had on the OB-X8, right? Because our baseline still is going to be that oscillator 2 is set 7 semitones up. If we set it, let's say 5 semitones up, it's probably going to sound a bit odd, but it still lands nicely back to our baseline. So again, we set this floor, we're setting a floor, right, to 7 semitones up, which is a fifth. From that point, let's modulate up to 1 octave, giving us room above and below our sustain, and then we can play with the attack, decay, and release to fall into that space, to rise up into that space, or to fall out of that space, right? Because this is kind of, this isn't necessarily our ceiling, it's more of like a, it's like our cruising altitude or something, right? Because let's say we wanted to fall down, let's descend into that. Right, and then we can again descend out of there even further. So let's go a little less decay and then fall out of this. Right, there's no attack here, so it's just starting from the peak, 127 as the amount. If we give it a little bit of attack, it's going to whip up to the very peak of 127 as, I don't want to say our voltage, but as our modulation amount. And then fall back down to where our sustain is set, which is 67. Without oscillator 1, it's just going to sound, you're just only going to hear the moving pitch, which is still cool. But I just love having like the oscillators kind of just chilling there, static, and then having one of them kind of moving in and out of place. Right. And if we really wanted to make this kind of plucky, we'll bring our decay down and our release down. This is just giving us a quick kind of fall into place. It almost sounds like SNES style. Right? A little too much. Still a little too much. Turn oscillator 2 back up. So check this. Let's try and apply this to another parameter, in this case, the filter frequency. And instead of bringing things down, let's bring things up. So we're going to close our filter. We'll give a little bit of modulation from our amp envelope. Now we'll go onto a second mod slot. And what do we want to happen? Well, we've set our floor. Now we want something to happen to this after. I could technically take mod envelope 1, right, which will be right, oh, whoops, my bad. That's the destination. So we're gonna find filter frequency and we're gonna turn it up. But what's weird is when you go and you add mod envelope 1 to this, it's still going to close it. So what do we do if we want the opposite of that? We can go negative. It doesn't always work because certain parameters can't go further than their lowest point or further than their highest point. So you can't like add sound that isn't there, but in this case it should work. Let's listen. Right? It is. And in a weird way, we're now setting our ceiling instead of our floor with the filter frequency. So let's find where we want it. Right there. So when I press keys, it's going to close, and when I let go, it's going to open up the filter. Right, we add a little bit of attack to this. Let's add a little bit more decay. Let's try this. We'll go no attack. And instead of mod envelope 1, we'll go mod envelope 2, and we'll do the same thing. We'll flip this around, where do I want it to land? When I'm holding down the note, kind of closed. When I let it go, it's going to go back to our bass, right? Now we can add a little bit of attack and decay. Throw a little reverb on there. Down an octave. Go back to mod envelope 1. Say we wanted this more subtle, we don't need to go negative 64, which is max. Let's just go minus 20. Set our floor again. On there. So what I'm trying to get at with this is utilize your envelopes. I mean, what am I trying to get at with this? I really don't know. I think that this is just a useful practice. Like I was mentioning earlier, for me to get this going, I learned about it at NAMM on the OB-X8. And then I applied it on Peak. And it made sense. hilariously, Peak is so much more flexible than an OB-X8, but it wasn't until I had a stripped down version of a synth with some constrictive controls, but guided controls, like, hey, try this. It's a default on the panel setting. It wasn't until I had that I was actually able to fully explore modulation, or it wasn't until that I was able to really take advantage of the endless possibilities that, say, software has, or a more, I don't want to say modern synth, but like a synth that has more mod matrix controls or modulation sources and destinations. I mean, you can even apply this to like modular stuff, which I'm pointing at here. That doesn't exist because it's in the closet right now. So, you know, do some fun stuff with this. I hope this inspires you to make a track or make some sort of sounds or some music. I would love to hear it. Leave it down in the comments below. Yeah, I think it's so cool. Just remember, your sustain is where it's going to land when you're holding down the notes. All right, if we want to change this, we can go slowly into that. Here, slowly closing. And then opens back up. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And then the pitch thing is doing its thing. Anyway, I hope you make some music with this, and I hope to see you again next week. I appreciate you more than you know. And yeah, until then, my friend, you already know the drill. Share the love, share the knowledge. Knowledge is power. Peace. All right, let's make this thing drone out. Go to effects, routing, delay, into reverb, into chorus. Let's get a long delay on here. Now let's go to effects.